Thanks for staying here with us on The Real Story. We're checking in now with Governor Ned Lamont. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be back.
So this past week, we opened the 2025 legislative session. You delivered your State of the State, and, you know, obviously a lot going on, very exciting. It was also Connecticut's 237th birthday, getting up there in age. And I know you've been checking in with a lot of different communities, agencies, groups about the next chapter of our state, those goals for, 2035, what's to come. But, what about right now? What are some of those investments, and maybe reiterating some of what you laid out in the State of the State, that you want to really come to fruition this session?
The investments we're making are going to be transformative by 2035.
Right.
I mean, look at the infrastructure money that we got mostly from the federal government.
Right.
We're going to be able to speed up your commute by train by 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on where you're going. We're taking some of those bottlenecks out of the highways. You used to think, oh my God, I need another whole lane or I'll never be able to speed things up. No, it's just these little places where you get the bottleneck. That's what we'll be able to clean up right now. I think by 2035, you're going to see our cities a lot bigger, big investment in housing. We talked about that at the State of the State a little bit. People want to come to the state. There's real demand right now. When you got the wind to your back, go for it.
You talked about that transportation funding. Connecticut was one of the top states to receive some of the most funding in that bipartisan infrastructure bill. And Connecticut receives a lot of federal funding in a lot of different areas. But I know you mentioned it a little bit in your State of the State, and I've also heard from some lawmakers, they feel the start of this session is a little bit of a wait and see until the new administration, President-elect Trump, is inaugurated down in D.C. Is that how you feel as well, that the lawmakers kind of need to hedge their bets a little bit, wait and see how Connecticut might have to react?
So for the State of the State, you say, this is how I think we're doing as a state. Compare how we're doing, say, to 5, 10, 15 years ago. I think people think we have some pretty good positive momentum right now. And this is where we want to go over the next 10, 20 years. Then in about 30 days, we're going to have the budget address. So to your point, Emma, oh my gosh, how is the federal government going to change? They're going to cut back on our Medicaid. They're going to cut back on aid to education. I don't think they're going to cut back on the infrastructure money because Donald Trump is a builder. I think he'd be happy to see the roads and bridges and rails, what we're doing now, continue.
Do you think we'll know enough come your budget address in February to really lay that out?
No, we'll know a lot more, but we won't know
the whole picture yet?
No, they can do this thing, they call it the reconciliation bill. They do that at Easter or something like that. We're sort of assuming they'll flat fund us, so I think that's the assumption we're making in our budget. We know where we're going to be as a state, through the end of this fiscal year. Next year's a little more complicated.
So something you've shifted more toward in the last few years, and the legislature has started doing as well, is more interstate collaboration. We've shared contracts and programs, more New England initiatives with the states banding together. How do you see that working now, and where do you want to see that go in the future? Yeah,
we're a small state. And it started off when I was working with, New York and Cuomo. I said, look, if I want to speed up Metro North, it doesn't work if New York doesn't play. So I started those relationships. And then they didn't really talk to each other, these governors, before. It sort of shocked me. And then when COVID came, what good's it for me to put in place some ways to keep us safe if right across the border they're not doing something similar? So I worked very closely with Charlie Baker and Gina Raimondo. They were governors at the time in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, saying, what should we do together? These borders are pretty artificial, especially if you're Mr. COVID.
And I know we're a small state, but taking it from the New England region to an even smaller scale, I know, after the State of the State, you met with some of the mayors of some of our bigger cities here in Connecticut. Do you feel like that plan's kind of reflected on a state level, getting those mayors together and talking about what needs they might share?
Yeah. We had about 25 mayors came in right after, talking a little bit about their reflections on the budget and how it impacts them. Obviously, everybody always likes more municipal aid. We've had a big increase in municipal aid.
Yeah.
A lot of talk about special education and how that's beginning to eat up more and more of state or municipal education budgets, how we can support those kids a little more from the state level. That was front and center.
Yeah. I know education, a really big priority. It has been for the past couple sessions as well. This is obviously, as we were talking about, a budget year, not giving your full proposal until February, but something that we can't stop talking about, whether it's you, whether it's lawmakers, is these fiscal guardrails. Mentioned the past 2 sessions, we've already heard them brought up, but some of the lawmakers I spoke to right after your State of the State, particularly on the Republican side, said they were a little concerned that you didn't mention them at all in the State of the State. In the past, you've been a really staunch supporter of sticking by the guardrails, not moving them at all, but we've heard some lawmakers on the Democratic side say they want to tweak them, adjust them a little bit because they kind of feel like their hands are tied, not being able to spend more of the state's historic surplus. How are you feeling about the guardrails now as we start off the 2025
I think they have served
session?
us very well.
Yeah.
You go back 10, 15 years, it was boom and bust, and everybody was talking about deficits, how much less money we have to spend, we're going to have to cut this or raise taxes there. I wanted to make sure we never had to do that within reason. We've had 6 straight balanced budgets in a row. We've also been able to increase investments in everything from K through 12 to higher ed to municipal aid, like I said before. I think it served us very well. I know some people say, Governor, you're paying down the outstanding pension liability too fast. We're paying it down over 30, 40 years, if that's too fast. But look, I'll work with people, but you got to have an honestly balanced budget. You can't do what they did in the past, which is put a lot of expenses onto the credit card and say, don't worry, my kids will pay for it.
Some of the lawmakers feel, though, now, when these were put in place in 2017, as you said, the state was in a really bad financial situation. Now, things have been going really well, and they say, these guardrails have more than done their job. So do you think there is any room to adjust them, or do you want
I think they're putting up the mission accomplished sign too fast.
Okay.
We've gone from, the second worst funded pension funds in the country to just below average.
Yeah.
And that's not good enough for me.
Yeah.
Look, I'll be able to work with people.
Okay.
We've got a lot more money in our operating budget because we paid down pensions. That's $600, $700, $800 million a year that we wouldn't otherwise have to invest in education.
Yeah. There's a lot of legislative work this year that's being brought back up, which died last session, didn't make it all the way through. A lot of that, as I said, expected to be picked back up. A lot of it to do with technology, something you've mentioned. I know last year in your State of the State, you talked about cell phone pouches. This year in the State of the State, you were able to talk about how well they're working in a lot of different classrooms. Another big part of that, though, is AI. You mentioned that as well in your State of the State. That big AI package from last session, though, with State Senator Maroney failed. You threatened to veto it. You said it really wasn't the time yet for Connecticut. Do you feel like it's the time now this session?
I'd be cautious.
Okay.
I really would. This is such a fast-changing technology. Connecticut, with a lot of regulation and some other things. Most of the manufacturing increase over the last 20 years has gone to the Southeast.
Yeah.
AI is going to be the source of a lot of jobs and innovation and opportunity for the next 20 years. I don't want that going to the Sun Belt as well. I want this to be an innovation center. I want innovators to come here. AI can just make our lives so much easier, so much more effective and efficient. I'm going to do everything I can with guardrails to protect people from the excesses of AI. We have a lot of laws already in place. So I've got to make sure they apply to the excesses that could come out of AI.
So you think maybe some of those specific protection-related measures, could go through, especially when they're not, wrapped up in a huge, big AI package, maybe,
I think so. Let's make
some
things specific in terms of, how we can help people out. I care deeply about protecting kids, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
That's why I want to get those phones out of the classroom. I want to get those phones out of the schools. I want parents to be empowered so that they can control what their 9-year-old gets and doesn't get on that phone. I think that's a place where we can make a big difference as a state, not just acting by ourselves.
Yeah. Another big policy package that we saw fail last session was around climate, dubbed the Green Monster Bill. Democrats, after talking with GOP leaders, shifted that strategy to be more incentive-based instead of mandates, but still, that marks 2 sessions without any major climate action. You said last year climate change really needed to be a priority for lawmakers. What do you want to see right now in terms of environmental policy coming out of this session?
What I want to do is continue to emphasize energy, more affordable energy, and more green energy.
Yeah.
I think to the degree to which I can have more housing in and around transportation centers so you don't need to have a car, that's a big environmental initiative. The degree to which I can expand nuclear power and move away from carbon-based fuels, I think that's a big environmental initiative. Those are some of the priorities I have that I think will make a long-term difference. And finally, as I spent a fair amount of time talking, is energy efficiency. Yeah. What that means is through insulation and the such in your homes, we'll put that in, we'll save you 10, 15% on your electric bill, and electricity you don't use creates no new CO2.
Yeah, and you mentioned offshore wind in your state of the state. Do you think this is really about spending that money to make those, greener investments now for it to pay off in the future?
Yep, as long as it doesn't burden my ratepayers.
Yeah. No, that's definitely been a big conversation with those utility bills. So one moment that stood out to me in your State of the State address, a lighthearted one about our new highway signs here in the state of Connecticut. So whether it be, pizza, basketball, beyond those, what are the everyday values for Connecticut that you want the state to be known for? Because obviously, as you mentioned, those signs went viral on the internet and on social media and has sparked a little bit of debate with surrounding states. But you did also talk about values. So what do you want people to take away as they feel are Connecticut's values?
Yeah, those signs where we immodestly called ourselves the pizza capital, the submarine capital of the world, got some attention. Basketball capital, most people said. I can understand that one pretty well. Most importantly, I want pride in the state. Yeah. I love the fact that people are talking about us. I love the fact that people are visiting us more than ever before. I love the fact that more people are staying. And in terms of those values, I want to make sure this continues to be a welcoming state. I want this to be a state where everybody, regardless of your background, you have a home here in Connecticut, and we welcome you here in Connecticut.
And another point of pride for the state and for you has been our colleges and universities. You've mentioned in many talks, not just the State of the State, how Connecticut has some of the best colleges and universities in the country and you feel in the world. A lot of them, though, say they've been struggling with that one-time pandemic-era funding gone. They've been coming back to the Capitol looking for more money. What do you think the state should be doing to support those colleges right now? What does that investment look like?
We support our colleges and universities. We have the best colleges and universities in the world. People from all over the world come to Connecticut because of our colleges and universities. But that doesn't mean you can't do better. Yeah. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to innovate. That doesn't mean that you ought to be able to say, have maybe some bigger classes, more popular classes, get rid of some of the smaller classes, maybe professors teach a little more so we can hold down tuition, make sure education is an opportunity for everybody, not a cost driver.
I know some of the disagreement was, those universities saying with their budgets, they ran out of that pandemic era funding, so they were lacking. You in the state, were saying they're getting more money than ever before because they shouldn't have really factored that pandemic era into the long-term budget. Do you see, the state giving them any more funding this year? Yeah,
they'll get some more. They'll have the highest grant that the state has ever given. But to your point, everybody said, you got this one-time, short-term COVID money from the feds. That was to help us get through the worst pandemic this country has ever seen. And now to say, oh my gosh, that's a new baseline and the taxpayers have to subsidize right up to that, I don't think is a reasonable assumption. But they're going to do better.
Okay, so in our last couple minutes here, with the inauguration so soon, the new Congress already started. down in DC. You know, you've mentioned that there are people who are obviously excited. You mentioned in your State of the State, it's a time of hope, but it's also, you know, a time of uncertainty. And a lot of people here in the state are a little bit scared. Some of them who we spoke with, I think, especially right now with day one threats, Connecticut's immigrant community is looking for guidance. What's your message to residents right now as they're in this time of uncertainty?
That, as I said before, we're a welcoming state when it comes to immigrants. We welcome and celebrate legal immigration. I'm one of those to say you got to be strict on the border. That said, anybody who's a criminal, anybody who's committing crimes, anybody who's a threat to our community, we're going to go after you and hold you accountable, regardless of your documentation status. But I do feel very strongly that 16-year-old dreamer who's at Guilford High School, I'm not interested in deporting her, putting her in the detention center. I don't want to play in that game, or we're not going to.
Yeah, well, Governor, a lot that we covered here and a lot more that's going to happen this session, so I'm sure we'll be checking in again, but we really appreciate you taking a couple minutes.
Right back at you, Emma. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That does it for us now here on The Real Story, but there's so much ahead this session, so you can find all of our episodes and our coverage at fox61.com or on the free Fox 61 News app, and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here or streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great morning.